Attention, it's still 2 to 5 years until Bitcoin's encryption could be broken by quantum computers. This is the latest warning from billionaire Chamath Palihapitiya, and it seems as if the topic of quantum computers is currently making a lot of people think about whether Bitcoin is really still safe. Quantum computers might threaten Bitcoin sooner than expected. We'll explore these claims and their implications. But now more and more statements are popping up from people who are massively attacking Bitcoin and saying, no, it's not that this could become dangerous in 20 years, but that a danger for Bitcoin could possibly arise in just 2 years. We're examining these statements and their implications. It might not be a direct quantum computer threat now, but panic is pushing investors out of Bitcoin. Some are happy to buy Bitcoin cheaper. Others who missed out are satisfied. Yet we can't ignore the danger. Jameson Lopp's comments on quantum threats to Bitcoin are concerning. We'll review his statements. There are players who are really happy about this news because it means they can buy Bitcoin at a lower price. On the flip side, it's definitely satisfying for a lot of folks who might have missed the Bitcoin boat. But we can't completely lose sight of the danger either, because what really set off my alarm bells was when Jameson Lopp talked about quantum computers and how they could indeed pose a threat to the Bitcoin network. We also look at his statements. Jameson Lopp, some people think he's Satoshi Nakamoto, which is crazy, which he definitely isn't. But there's definitely a Bitcoin OG here who's been with Bitcoin for a very, very long time and who definitely doesn't want to somehow drop the Bitcoin price or anything like that, but who definitely has altruistic approaches here, at least in my opinion. But before we dive into the alarming statements from Jameson Lopp and billionaire Chamath Palihapitiya, no need to worry in the next few years about breakthroughs in quantum encryption cracking Bitcoin. This is a long-term issue. Even in 10 years, when quantum computers might crack Bitcoin, there will be ways to secure the network through forks and other methods. Listen to Chamath Palihapitiya on Bitcoin and quantum attacks. This is a long-term story, and even if Bitcoin, let's say in 10 years or so, when quantum computers are so advanced that they can crack the Bitcoin algorithm, even then there are ways to secure the Bitcoin network in other ways through forks and much more. But listen to what Chamath Palihapitiya has to say about Bitcoin and the quantum computer attack.
Because I had to figure out how long it would take for us to crack the Bitcoin algorithm. We use it for Bitcoin, Nick. Here's the answer, because I was really thrown off by this idea. So, if you think of a willow as basically one, stable, logical, qubit equivalent, in a chip, we need about 4,000 of those to break RSA 2048. And we need about 8,000 to break SHA 256, which is the underlying encryption framework for Bitcoin. So, I think you're right. I think we're kind of in the end game, like a 2 to 5 year countdown. No, I think what's going to have to happen is that some of these chains will need to basically rework things at a pretty fundamental level. The strange thing, as Friedberg points out, is that the error correction for the Willow chips improves. The more of these things you start using together, there are some really big issues inside these chips, like the logical interconnects being super complicated. If you put 2 chips on a board, the C-to-C communication is all the stuff we haven't figured out how to do yet. But this is a big deal. I was really like, my God, what's going on here?
So we have here a clear statement from Chamath, the 2001, who says that we still have 2 to 5 years before Bitcoin is in massive danger. But if we really listen closely, we can see that this podcast is often used to really corner Bitcoin with Chamath. It's not that crazy, but just look at Jason, how he's reacting, laughing, and grinning. And Jason here in the All In podcast, which is really a relevant podcast here in the US, probably one of the most watched podcasts in the country, he's always taking shots at Michael Saylor. It's not that crazy, but look at Jason here, how he looks at this and how this one is laughing and how this one is grinning. And Jason here in the All In podcast, which is really a relevant podcast in the US, probably one of the most watched podcasts in the country, he's always taking major shots at Michael Saylor. He says MicroStrategy is going to fail, Bitcoin is going to fail, it's all just, let's say, hype and so on. And Michael Saylor wouldn't have a clue, and this whole thing just wouldn't work. And he's really going hard against Bitcoin. And just look at how happy he is right now, as Chamath is throwing out these theses. Also, there are a few technical mistakes he's making in this statement. He says here that at the moment, it somehow takes 4,000 qubits to crack the ECDSA 256 algorithm. And then you need another 8,000 to crack the SHA 256 algorithm. I actually looked it up again, and it's way more than that. You need millions of qubits, which are required to crack these algorithms. That also means that the time frame where it could get dangerous isn't 2 to 5 years, but more like 20 to 50 or 20 to 40 years, or let's just say 20 years for now. So the big question now is, do people not get this? Or is there a deliberate effort to spread panic to push investors out of the Bitcoin network? We also saw it when the news came out about the Willow quantum computer, when that got released. Once the Bitcoin price crashed and people realized, oh, Bitcoin isn't going to fail after all, the price did bounce back a bit and started to recover and so on. I'm not trying to accuse anyone here, but I can certainly envision in my mind that with these attacks through fat articles, through fat news and so on, there's an effort to keep the Bitcoin price low, either to push their own bags like Chamath, since he has a lot of Bitcoin, or like Jason, it might just be a way to express his envy or maybe even resentment against Bitcoin because he missed out on this opportunity boat because he doesn't own any Bitcoin himself personally because he sees, hey, MicroStrategy and Michael Saylor are making better investments than I am myself personally, and I don't have any good arguments, so I just have no choice but throw some crap at Bitcoin. But if there were really a computer tomorrow that could crack the algorithms or the encryption of Bitcoin, that would definitely be a big problem. And Jameson Lopp, who some people think is Satoshi, but he definitely isn't. There was a documentary where he was treated as Satoshi. He's been in the Bitcoin space for a really long time, since 2001, and he's laying out the case and explaining what would happen if a computer like that actually existed overnight. Let's just assume that tomorrow, overnight, such a computer would exist. What would happen to the Bitcoin price? What would happen to the Bitcoin network? And how could things progress from there? What kind of danger would we really be facing?
What would happen if a computer came online that suddenly started stealing people's money? They would target high-value wallets, causing a market shift and panic. If people thought it was a quantum computer and we lacked a quantum-resistant Bitcoin script, everyone would rush to exit. Most would lose significant savings and Bitcoin might recover, but the timeline is uncertain. A crisis response might force a protocol upgrade, delaying market recovery for years. We should aim to fix this smoothly before a crisis. Unfortunately, the vast majority of people would lose a lot of the value they had in their savings, and maybe Bitcoin would bounce back, but who knows how long that would take. If it triggered a crisis response and we had to forcefully upgrade the protocol, I think it would still probably take years for the general market sentiment to recover. I think that's one of the reasons we should aim to fix this as smoothly as possible before we hit a crisis.
So he's clearly laying out the scenario of what happens in a quantum computer crisis if we suddenly have a mega computer tomorrow. He says that first, the big wallets will be targeted, so the ones with the most to gain, like Satoshi with nearly 1 million Bitcoin, then of course maybe the big MicroStrategy wallets, Coinbase, those large custodians like Binance and so on, which sometimes have hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin sitting in a single address. Those will be attacked first. Satoshi with nearly 1 million Bitcoin, then of course maybe the big MicroStrategy wallets, Coinbase, those large custodians like Binance and so on, which sometimes have hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin sitting in a single address. They'll be attacked first. So if you have small Bitcoin holdings, you're generally safer than if you have large amounts, which makes sense. I mean, from a game theory perspective, it usually makes sense to target the big holdings. Then panic will break out, especially when people realize, hey, there's a quantum computer attack happening, but there's no solution for it yet. There's basically the attack, but no solution. That means there's going to be a massive price drop, probably one of the biggest corrections we've ever seen. 90%, 95%, those kinds of things are possible, especially when there's no potential solution in sight. And that's why he says we need to start preparing now, basically developing quantum-resistant algorithms so that if something like this were to happen, at least we have a solution and we could potentially fork the Bitcoin network, like create a split. He also makes it clear that it wouldn't destroy Bitcoin, but there would definitely be a massive drawback. It would probably take years to regenerate the whole thing. He also makes it clear that it wouldn't destroy Bitcoin, but there would definitely be a massive drawback. It would probably take years to regenerate the whole thing. For FTX, it somehow took 2 years to regenerate the Bitcoin price. In the case of a quantum computer attack, this could take much, much longer. Not because we wouldn't have a technical solution, but because it would take time for trust to return to the network and so on. That's why he also recommends that we start working on these algorithms now and go through the scenarios ahead of time, so that if any of these situations arise, we have a way to fork out of the Bitcoin network. That would definitely be a huge effort. The nodes would need to update their software, the miners would have to do it, and the users would need to understand what's happening now that we suddenly have two different truths. On one side, you have the old chain, let's say, which isn't quantum resistant, and on the other side, you have the new chain that is quantum resistant. So this is a very, very risky scenario if, for example, a computer like that were to show up in the morning. But like I said, the chance that a computer like that just shows up tomorrow and goes, tada, hey, here I am, is very, very unlikely. And because of that, I tend to think that statements and warnings like these are more about creating panic. So what Jameson Lopp is saying here is absolutely legitimate. He's just going through the worst case scenario here, like what could happen if we had a quantum computer It's pretty cool to go through the worst case scenario. But what Jamit and Jason are doing over at the All In podcast, in my opinion, is more about creating panic, and we shouldn't fall for that. By the way, big recommendation, if you're interested, definitely check out the Bitcoin Hotel shop. Here we have our awesome Flower of Life t-shirt. It's definitely my favorite shirt right now. There are also more cool things like hardware wallets and our Princess Hodler, which by the way will be shipped soon, but it's probably going to be after Christmas. It's not entirely certain because they're currently stuck in customs. We actually wanted to ship those out a long time ago, but they're unfortunately stuck in customs right now. So sorry to everyone who pre-ordered a Princess Hodler, but they will be out soon. So probably definitely this year, but maybe not until after Christmas, maybe even before, we'll see. You can simply click on the link below and it will take you to our Bitcoin shop where you can find all kinds of things, as I said. And now a big recommendation, if you want to buy Bitcoin, check out 21 Bitcoin, the easiest way to buy Bitcoin in Europe. With the code Bitcoin Hotel, you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. I'll also put a link to Bitcoin down below. Let me know if you have any concerns about this or if you're just taking it easy and chill. Until then, peace out.